what would you say from your perspective, what role will AI play in futures studies or maybe also in Foresight?
So it's going to impact our work because it can replace a lot of our work. And I have to be honest and say it can. I know people keep saying, I think it's more a story we tell ourselves that, it's not creative, it doesn't have original thought, but God knows we all know a lot of people, including ourselves, who don't have original thought.
Thanks for saying that. That's exactly my opinion too.
Let's just,
Yeah, that's 100% my opinion.
Good, because sometimes people are like, yeah, but at least we can. I'm like, really? I mean, if you listen to pop music today, really?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that original? Is it just, we know what rhythm works, we know, what videos work, and...
It's not, no.
Exactly.
Innovation Rockstars. Innovation Rockstars.
In this episode, we welcome Dasha Krivonos, CEO of the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies.
Hi, and welcome back to Innovation Rockstars. My name is Chris Muroth, and today I have a fantastic guest. I have Daria, or Dasha Krivonos. I hope I spelled this correctly, or pronounced this correctly. She's as the CEO for Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, which is a multidisciplinary think tank and also advisory. She's, of course, an absolute expert in anything future studies and strategic foresight, and also board member and advisory for a few companies. So quite a lot of things going on. Thanks for taking the time. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Dasha.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right. And as always in this podcast, it has already become a habit. We do have a 60-second introduction sprint. That sprint is all about you, your career, your current role. So for the next 60 seconds, the virtual stage is all yours. Let's go, Dasha.
Well, I think this is difficult. And I know I've seen the questions before, but still, I think my career more than anything speaks to the future we're heading into, if I have to be honest. So it's been accidental, but amazing. What I mean by that is that I started choosing one field. I'm an economist by background, classical economist, and I've done everything from risk in a global corporate, working across 9 different industries, 130 countries. I've done macro modeling of trade lanes, commodities, etc. And then by sheer accident, I met the Institute, and I joined them as an advisor. First for a couple of months, and then again somehow things just pan out in a way that I ended up taking over as CEO, and I've been doing that for 5 years now. So I think my current role is a very humbling role, as I get to work with a lot of very, very different people, and I know we'll get back to that in a little bit, but I think I spent 10 years perfecting my discipline, and then the last 5 I've spent coming to terms with it not being the most important discipline in the world, and maybe learning from some of the most interesting people I've ever met, but from this privileged position of also getting to set the stage and the direction for the Institute.
Yeah, that's interesting. And maybe to get to know you just a little bit better, what I also like to do is to give you 3 sentence starters. And my ask to you would be to complete those sentence starters. Pretty simple. And it's totally up to you if you answer long, short, fast, slow. But let's see what happens. The first sentence starter is artificial general intelligence. So AGI is...
Artificial general intelligence is several things. First of all, I think it is hyped. What I mean by that is that people confuse it with the AI general. And I think, of course, that's a very dangerous mistake to make. The second part is, I think, reading the experts, and I'm not an expert. I think it is something that really is divisive. I mean, it's dividing the experts on whether or not it's going to be here in just a couple of years or never, or so, it's really, really hard to grasp. And I think the last thing it is a complete game changer. And I think we're underestimating the effect, the potential impact on society and on us as a species. So I don't mean to sound alarmist, but I do think that while we discuss it as this fascinating technology, I think we're failing to think through the ultimate impact it may have on who we are, our way of life, and missing a golden opportunity to steer it for the better.
I think there is a great part of urgency to it. I totally agree. And I guess one way how specifically OpenAI is trying to help with that is that they deliberately decided to release iterations toward a possible AGI early to anybody, right? So that's why they continuously release the GPT models and also including ChatGPT as a user interface, because in their perspective, it's easier to understand and to grasp what this might mean to us and for us if we see it's developing over time and being able to use it rather than at some point in time when it's available, just being confronted by it, maybe by surprise. Interesting discussion, but I agree with your position on that. And the second sentence starter would be a futurist is...
A futurist is a professional... I guess a futurist is a professional explorer of potential outcomes. It's someone who for a living keeps asking what if, right? Not what we're going to do about it, not then, but it's someone who day in, day out keeps asking what if. And it's someone who is willing to entertain future trajectories that may not necessarily feel very good, but for as long as they're plausible, you have to keep asking what if. So it's someone who can build several different plausible future trajectories, all underpinned with knowledge and data and trends, but they can be distinctly different. And someone who doesn't shy away from that fact, regardless of how these trajectories make you feel.
Yeah, that's a very nice explanation. Maybe the most concise one I've heard so far, to be honest, because I think there is many misconceptions around that. Right. So, but maybe we get to that later. Very interesting. And number 3 sentence starter is to start my days right. I
leave my phone far away from where I sleep. It's a new thing, and I know it's not a new thing for other people, but it's a relatively new thing for me. So we're all our work life is floating into our private sphere. The phones are an amazing tool, but it's also it's a pitfall. So I climbed Kilimanjaro this summer, and I know many people have done it, so it's not like it's it was quite an achievement for me, but it's not the Everest. But more than anything, it's 7 or 8 days without being connected to anything because there's no signal. And for the first few days it's scary, and then you get used to it, and then by the time you come down from the mountain, you're actually not it feels like it's disturbing some sort of a mental peace you found. So you open your apps and you see people have been texting you, how's the mountain, friends getting a divorce while we were up there, etc. So I've actually piggybacked on that detox, and I've taken the phone out of my bedroom. So for my day to start right, as of this summer, is to wake up to an old-fashioned alarm clock that we bought. And to wake up and take in what's happening around me, even just for 30 seconds, and not necessarily reach for my phone, check the news, check my emails, etc. So
which has become a habit.
That's my day starting right.
For most, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah. First thing.
But if it's not within reach,
Yeah.
It's not possible. And it's magic. It's a completely different way to wake up your brain.
Mm-hmm. Probably a better one and a more healthy one, to be honest, of course, yeah.
Well,
can you tell me more?
Maybe not the answer you expected, but that's it, yeah.
There was no expectations at all, so absolutely. And can you tell me more about the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies? What does it do?
I would love to, and thank you for asking. First of all, we're a very old think tank, so we sound like a public institution, but we're not. So I guess it originally was given that name to give it some weight and credibility, but we're 54 years old. And it's funny to be bragging about history when you work with the future, but it says something about our approach, which means we never say anything for certain, or we try not to at least. But we work with mega trends, we work with these long-term trajectories, which means we're hardly ever wrong because we never say anything specific. But it's about, now we're roughly 30 people, give and take. And between us, we have 19 different professional backgrounds. We have roughly 11 nationalities. And of course, that means that more than anything, we are this melting pot of views of the world. And again, this is just a moment in time, right? So your profession is a label, your nationality is a label, and behind that, there's 30 different pathways to where we are now. So people bring all of their experience, and I think we're a place where, if you're young, we're gonna benefit from your youth. If you've been there for a long time, we're gonna benefit from your experience. If you're from a small country, we're gonna be stress tested on whether or not we're only doing things from our part of the world, etc. So it's a place that thinks outside the box. I sometimes call it the CERN of trends, and what I mean by that is like a particle collider. So if I, as an economist, I would throw out an idea and say, I think the world is going to go this way, given the geopolitics, I will stay within my own métier. But then it's going to collide with a sociologist, it's going to collide with a historian, and a philosopher is going to have a go. And then through all of these colliders, in the end, we're going to shape a more credible vision for what this particular trajectory could mean. Because then it has been challenged by how is society going to respond. It has been challenged by the young people saying the next generation is not going to perceive it that way, etc., etc. So the Institute is an NGO. We are an independent think tank. We're fully self-funded, completely independent of anything, and we are an intellectual playground, and we are basically a trend collider, just like CERN, but with brains and ideas.
And I think it's very interesting. You've mentioned it in the beginning. You do have a strong economics background, right? And I do suspect that a large part of your team at the Institute is very creative and obviously, as you mentioned, very diverse. Many different backgrounds, many different labels, as you said. So now, in the role of its CEO, and given your background, what's your take and your key learnings in leading such a diverse team and the Institute? What is your strongest learnings in that?
There's so many. I think, first of all, as I said, I joined from a big corporate. I joined from one of the biggest companies in Denmark, a global leader in its field. So Maersk is the biggest shipping company in the world still. So of course I came with a perception of how things should be and what are the right disciplines, what matters, etc. And so the first learning for me was that my discipline, if not inferior, then it's narrow. So this whole expert problem, which I also often mention on my talks, like experts don't know what they don't know. So the best thing you can do to them is expose them to experts within something completely different and say there's different ways of solving things. So my first learning was that there's no one discipline in the world that can have a credible view of what the future is going to be like. Because the fewer people you ask and the more certain they feel, the more wrong you are. That was a learning. And I come from a world where I had to forecast long-term models, etc. So that was a learning. The second part is that and I use that also, we have these cognitive biases, is that if you're discussing something very complex and people agree too soon, it means someone is lying or someone is missing, right? So always of course, if you're discussing something that needs to be done next week, maybe it's easy, you arrive at something. But if you're discussing what the world will be like in 10 years, you better disagree. So as uncomfortable as it is to be in a leadership position, to sometimes have people disagree with you day in, day out, all day long, disagree with each other. So the more difficult it is for me to make a decision based on a dialogue, the better the dialogue we've had. And then, of course, just on a personal note, since this is still a bit of a personal conversation, for me to lead so many different people, it's tapping into different parts of my personality, my leadership style. Some of these parts I didn't even have. They had to be developed and trained throughout, because these are people so different from me. If you come from the corporate world, there's still a profile, right? Yes. So you may be different and you may look different and have different favorite foods, but you will have commonalities in your profiles. Here, there's a lot of very different people. So I think from a leadership position, it's probably the most challenging, but also the most rewarding thing I've ever done, because it's basically forced me to develop features I didn't have and really sharpen those that have been asked for.
It's interesting that you use the word features, but maybe that's for another conversation. In an earlier conversation, you said something that's stuck with me. you said that the future is always important but never urgent. And that's interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, actually, I mean exactly that. So, and when we spoke last time, we also kind of pulled a little bit more in my background. I think we also discussed this. There's this kid's brain teaser, right? Saying you're running a race and you overtake the second in line. What number are you in the race? And the answer is that you're still second in the race.
Yep.
I mean, and that's what happens to the future all the time. And I base that on the conversations we've had with my former employer and some of the most senior management teams, meetings, etc. And for 4.5 years, I headed up the enterprise risk team. So risk shares that characteristic with the future, that it's extremely important. But I could see from the time allocated during the meetings and the management attention, etc., it was never really urgent. It was always pushed to another day, or, we're going to have to discuss something at length, so we're going to shorten the time for risk, etc. And the future shares that feelings or that feature, because every time you would discuss the future, and everybody would agree that it's extremely important. We need to know where we're in 10 years. But you know what? We have these quarterly results, or we have this incident in a plant, if you have factories, or, so it always has to give up the first place to something else that needs to be discussed, decided, and it's going to take up management attention, but it will remain important until it's suddenly urgent, but it's because it's not the future anymore, then it really hits you as the present. So it's always important. Everybody says it's important, but it's never treated as something urgent.
I think you could say similar things about, a discipline where we are very much at home, which is innovation and innovation management. We see similar developments, but why do you think there is so little urgency about that future? I mean, sure, yes, there is. I agree, and Eisenhower matrix, important and urgent, and then you say, okay, sure, it's always important, it's never urgent. What do you think is the reason for that? Because it's not tangible, because it's happening anyways. Why is it not urgent?
Well, I think it's several things. I think, first of all, it's as people, we have a tendency to overrate change in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. So it's this, we always feel that first of all, we feel that it's not that bad. It's sometime in the future. We think we disconnect from our future selves. But this thing right here is right now, right? So again, if I have to run a marathon a year from now, I'll keep pushing the preparation because, I have a year. And so that's the second bit. With the future, we feel like we still have time to respond, but this here and now it calls for action right now. Problem is, resources are zero-sum game. So if you spend them on now, you're not going to spend them on the future. It's just as simple as that. So you need to be very, very structured and very disciplined about allocating time to address something that it remains 10 years out in the future. Because if you don't do it now, it's going to be 9 years, then 8 years, and then suddenly it's going to make it to the urgent, but then it's too late. So I think, so it's not lack of will, but it's a little bit like risk. So unless it happens, it's invisible. And you can all agree, we hope this is not going to happen. But it's an invisible gain that is somewhere out in the future, and we have a hard time connecting with it emotionally, and especially allocating the proper time to do it.
What we see specifically happening in private companies at an increased frequency is, new roles popping up, called foresight managers or corporate foresight managers or things like that, which I think is a good step, maybe even a good step in the right direction. But then, they tend to be in the job for maybe a year or two, maybe 3, depending on the company and on the speed of change or the rate of change for that company. And then they run into problems in proving and communicating the value of the role. Because it's, they also tend to not position themselves, obviously, because sometimes it's just not possible, in one way or the other. They create options, they open up possible future trajectories, like this could happen or that, but obviously the business needs to decide, so product management or technology or R&D or whomever needs to decide, right? And they're understood as internal consultants, maybe as advisors, but for example, in times where the economy is contracting to a certain extent, which we see right now in 2023, it's sometimes hard for them to justify their impact and their influence in the now, which is exactly what we discussed right now. Are you seeing the same things if you're working with private companies, or is it from your viewpoint a different thing?
No, absolutely. I think absolutely. And as also, we had an interview in one of the biggest Danish dailies this summer, and I was asked, so, in light of COVID and Ukraine and all of that, do you feel that people are more ready for change? Are they more vigilant? Are they, and frankly, and again, this is a personal opinion, but the senior, CXOs that I sometimes work with, there seems to be a paradox of there's uncertainty fatigue. So rather than being more alert, people are like, can we just please go back to normal? So I absolutely, I think that it is kind of the same. So the people working with the long term have a really hard time getting through to whoever it is, because you kind of have to prove your worth now. But and this is where I say, so risk management shares that feature. It's like, yeah, but how do you measure something that didn't happen? Basically, right?
Exactly.
So, we evaded all these risks, but
Yes.
But what if you never know? So it's all else equal kind of doesn't work in the real world, right? You can't measure these things, and I can see the Foresight practitioners running into the same problem. But I have to be honest, a little bit like risk, it also depends on where in the organization you anchor it, because it can be failure by design. And I have the biggest respect for people who work with law and lawyers, but the moment you put risk management under the legal structure, under the CEO, for instance, then legal, it becomes compliance. It becomes a checklist. It's a passive, basically ensuring that you're compliant with something. I'm not going to say it's unambitious, because it's not fair to the people who do all the hard work, but it's not proper risk management, right? Then you're just checking a process. You're not actually checking for risk. No. And I used to be in shipping, and one of our competitors, one of their ships broke in half, but it was fully compliant with the class requirement. Sure. So there's a difference between being compliant and sufficient. And I think this is what some of the Foresight practitioners also run into, is like, yeah, you're somewhere in a structure that we'll call you when we need you, kind of. And so, this is going to happen in 10 years, but we're looking at investment in 3 months. So thanks. So I think it's with the best of intentions, but it's the organizations haven't matured to fully capture the value of such people or such roles. And then they basically run out of steam before they even started, which is a shame.
It is certainly with the best intentions, of course. But there's two things to that. One is, can we get back to, the normal? We've experienced this also in many different conversations. But, we also need to be honest. There will be no old normal. That's gone. This is never going to come back. And the thing we are seeing right now, despite maybe some economic turmoils, sure, I agree, but that's actually normal. Times with prosperity and then times with contraction is super normal. That is normality. Yeah. If you just have a short-term horizon and look at maybe 2, 3, 5 years, because that's what your work contract is for, well, yes, then maybe you're not used to those waves. But that's actually normality. And maybe the amplitude is different, I agree, but that's actually what's normal. And that's one thing. And the second thing, based on the conversations you have, what do you think is the best, or where have you seen Foresight practitioners being, from an org design perspective, being positioned the most effective in an organization?
Well, I think, of course, if you have a visionary CEO, someone who has to look beyond the numbers, and again, I've worked in a finance department for 10 years, so it's not at all neglecting that, but I think I think if you want to make proper use of Foresight, you need to disconnect the whole P&L thing, at least for a little bit. You need to be able to entertain qualitative discussions, and that doesn't happen in a CFO track.
No.
That is all. You need to turn it into some sort of either a revenue or cash flow, or which are fair disciplines. But this is about considering things that haven't happened yet and may never happen, but you need to be ready for them. So I think the first thing you can do is remove the constraints of having to deliver on something right here and right now. So I would guess the CEO track is probably the better track, because this is someone who's supposed to be thinking wider. The second thing I would probably, I guess my take would be that it should have some sort of connection to the board, because the board are actually stewards of the longevity of a company, right? So even the CEO still has to deliver every month, every quarter, every year. while the board transcends that, both in their, how the terms that they serve, and they usually work across different CEOs, right, in time.
Yes.
So I'd probably have a dotted line or some sort of conversations on board level, because these are the stewards of the broader future of a company. So I think that would be the biggest success factor. And I think you need the mandate, and you need very articulated support from the top, saying we believe this role adds value and they should be in the room, despite the fact that they're not going to give you the best guess of a WACC or the discounted rates for anything over the next 3 months.
Yeah, to the board. That's very interesting. That's very interesting perspective. And we've got so much going on at the same time, basically right now. We've just mentioned the global challenges. You name it, you get it. Climate change, political instability, inflation going wild for some time, substantial increase in monetary supply, and so on and so on. And of course, now we have the AI, or maybe the even more advanced AGI discussions. But there's also other technological advancements aside from AI. It's just hyped right now. From what you've seen, and you've worked across a lot of industries, a lot of organizations, probably a lot of leaders too. How would you say that future studies can help organizations, and then at the broader scale, maybe also society, prepare and adapt? Because yes, it's plausible futures, it's plausible trajectories, but how does it help you actually to be prepared for that in the future when it hits?
Well, I think the first thing future studies does, again, this is my interpretation, because I come out of the corporate sector, right? So I have many colleagues who've only done foresight and are really, really good at that as a discipline. So the shortcomings I have in foresight as a discipline, I then hopefully make up for, because I can bring it into the real world from the corporate side. So I think what future studies do more than anything is that they challenge your wishful thinking, and it shines light on the blind angles. So it forces people to disconnect from a preferable future, because no matter what we do, even if you invite the risk team into the conversation, which people rarely do. I mean, as when I left, I was told that behind our backs, we were called the business preventing office.
Yeah, sure.
Which is not really fair. But so I think what future studies manage to do, what foresight can do, is forcing every decision maker to consider and imagine a different outcome than what they're planning for, and say, okay, this is great, because usually most companies fall in love with the future, they plan towards it, and very quickly they switch to internal focus, like what do we need to do, what systems should we have in place to capture all this, and who should we employ, etc. So they completely forget the external environment. So I think it forces you to consider what needs to be true. And I think that's the most important part of a conversation. It's not about how many headquarters you need to have or where should it be. I mean, when you fall in love with a trajectory, you put yourself, you decide on a strategy, park the strategy. And then in this environment, close your eyes, basically step into a room together and say, okay, let's be honest and let's describe what needs to be true in the external environment for this to be a success. And very quickly you find out that I usually dissect it in two ways. So there will be three different things that need to be true. And there will be pillars supporting this journey for you, right? And you'll quickly realize that some of these developments you can control. Even some of them is external market developments. You're a big player, you may actually be able to impact the market with some things. Then there will be a whole range of things which you cannot control, but you have a pretty good idea where they're going, like some of the megatrends. And then there's going to be a big group of assumptions that you can't control. And if you're honest with yourself, you actually have no idea where they're going. That's the one dissection. So first of all, you need to be honest about these three groups and say some things we can control, some things we can't, but we can map them. And the last part is basically, it's just wishful thinking. And you have to be vigilant if that starts to move out of what you wanted it to be. The second way to dissect it is most strategies, most future visions assume three different things without knowing it. They assume that some things will continue to develop, be it technology or urbanization, or so some things will need to continue to develop. There will be some things they need to stop from developing, which is a little bit, and I'll give you an example in a little bit. And it's very it's an unconscious thing, and then you have to check yourself saying, okay, how realistic is it that whatever this trend was is going to stop in its tracks? And last but not least, there are some things that actually need to go backwards. And then you can also sit down and check yourself. So say if you are Tesla or whoever, so if you put all your eggs in the basket of electrical vehicles, you're going to need the battery development to continue and hopefully peak and, progress, or not peak, but progress. You're going to need the hydrogen development to stop, because that's basically the competition, right? Maybe we'll have hydrogen cars. And you need the next generation to go back on their tracks of sharing and using public transportation. You need to go back to being who we were and buy 4 vehicles per household, right? So if you're an electric vehicle producer, there's actually things you need to develop, things that need to stop developing, and there are things that need to go backwards. And that's rarely something people consider that vigilantly, but they should, because how realistic is it that something will stop? And how realistic is it that something is going to go back? If you're a dictator, you want democracy to go back.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
Again, so your whole strategy rests on something regressing. But we never really discuss it in the open. And I think that's what Foresight can do. It can force you to look at these things in these categories and then consider what should you be looking out for.
It's interesting because in the society right now, the discussion around artificial intelligence basically implies that it's going to develop further and further and further. But I just see rare discussions about what if that's not the case. What if, and maybe for some capacity reasons, not because the algorithms are there, but maybe just because we will hit a natural limit of processing power, graphical units, and whatever this runs on. And personal disclaimer, I think it will have tremendous change. It's already in fact having tremendous change on anything and any area in life, including business, right? But what if not? And the discussion is totally geared to, we're going to face AGI pretty much soon, so let's talk about universal basic income because there will be no jobs anymore. And we're kind of assuming that's maybe not even the preferable, but the only trajectory this is going into, and maybe the majority of the public discussion is going into that direction. So you would step in, for example, and say, well, there is different outcomes that this could have, and have you ever considered them before?
And that's exactly it. So we would present alternatives to the trajectories that people are imagining now. And I think it's funny you say that, and that's the thing. So first of all, again, I'm not an engineer. So the little I know from the popular literature. Again, so people who don't work with this on a daily basis, they actually don't know what AGI is, what it could mean, but everybody's like, it's going to be here any minute now. The scary part is we're seeing, and if I can step back a little bit to the technology discussion, I think for me, we're being naive about technology. What I mean by that is we keep moving the goalpost. When Deep Blue beat Kasparov, everybody was shocked. There's this famous picture, you see all these... I'm going to say tech or chess enthusiasts, nerds in the background. They're like, whoa, oh my God, he actually lost the return match. But we moved the goalpost saying, okay, chess is just one discipline. Then then machines they pass the Turing test. And, okay, fine. That's not intelligence either. And now we're seeing the next versions of OpenAI or the language models. I mean, the experts are basically saying we're seeing some sort of sentient thought, or, it's basically reflecting on, I don't want to die, or, the Google people who left. And we keep saying, but it's just an algorithm. And then that makes me question, then what are we? I mean, we have no idea how neural networks work. So maybe we're going to miss the moment when it's here because we keep telling ourselves that's not really it. We don't recognize it for what it is. So I have a concern that we're being naive and we keep moving the goalpost on something, I'm not a believer, but basically if Jesus came back today for real, he'd end up in a mental asylum, because that's how we would greet him. It's like, you're what? We can help you with this, So I think we keep changing we keep changing our vision for what AGI will be, which means it could easily arrive here in a month and we wouldn't even know. We keep saying, but that's not really it. So that was a little bit of a deviation, but I think, but that's back to your question saying, for now, and I agree with you that some said, it's going to take over everything, but there's been my challenge with the AI discussion, maybe exactly because I'm not a tech expert. In layman's terms, at least in Denmark and in Scandinavia, I think it's been polarized. At least we wasted the first 7-8 months, and we can say happy birthday to AI in the general public now, right? Because it's about a year ago.
Yes.
Maybe it'll be symbolic to write to actually light a candle for different reasons, But the discussion has been paperclip. So we're all going to die. It's going to turn all of us, any carbon atom it's going to find would be turned into a paperclip. And then there's the other ones, which it's going to solve everything. And all we need to do is figure out what to do with our lives so we don't get depressed because we have nothing to do. I think the real world is going to be somewhere in the middle. But we've wasted so much time being either scared or utopically excited that we didn't get to discuss this, not properly. So I think the main trajectory that I would like people to consider now is actually what happens in between. So rather than do the extremes, say what can AI do? What will be its pathway through society? Because imagine it's a river. How is it going to flow through society in education, in social elements, in work, in health, in public administration? So just let these rivers run and see how do we actually see them making their way through it, and what impact are they going to have throughout?
I mean, being humans, and humans are attracted to fantastic stories, right? To the extreme stories. So I at least this attributes to the question of why it's either doom or utopia. So that's certainly a factor. But what would you say from your perspective? What role will AI play in future's studies, or maybe also in foresight?
See, I was thinking about it when we discussed it, when I saw the question, because I fell into the trap of saying it will be something we will be applying foresight on, right? So what I mean by that is that we're going to use our discipline to explore how is it going to impact society. It's not going to impact us really. And then I was thinking about it, it's like, okay, now I'm falling into the same trap as everybody else. I'm not really considering the what if for us. So I can see we are going to have to use it as a tool for sure, because others will. We're going to have to find the edge it doesn't have, because there's many things it can do that we do now, no doubt. If you do it right, I mean, it's like, no, I can't make rap music, but, I can, with the help of AI, I can actually make rap music. It's not going to be as good as the original, but it's, it will be out there, which means people now can do foresight without us. So we need to consider this critical angle of how do we then add value. So it's going to impact our work because it can replace a lot of our work. And I have to be honest and say it can. I know people keep saying, I think it's more story we tell ourselves that, it's not creative, it doesn't have original thought, but God knows we all know a lot of people, including ourselves, who don't have original thought.
Thanks for saying that. That's exactly my opinion too.
Let's just,
Yeah, that's 100% my opinion.
Good, because sometimes people are like, yeah, but at least we can. I'm like, really? I mean, if you listen to pop music today, really?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that original? Is it just, I mean, we know what rhythm works. We know, what videos work, and
it's not. No.
Exactly. So I think it will impact our own work. No doubt. It can do a lot of what we do in terms of at least processing, and of course, it will also create more work because, again, as you said, this is one of the big unknowns. And had you spoken to me in October last year, or maybe even mid-November last year, I would say I don't think technology changes much in the world, period. And I would be very unpopular for saying it because I'm a futurist. I should be thinking about cyborgs and flying cars. And we've always been discussing flying cars. Every time we discuss the future, we go to science fiction. And science fiction is very often techie. And I sometimes jokingly say anyone with a pacemaker is a cyborg. I mean, they have arrived. Let's just accept it, basically. So until recently, I would probably say technology is a force multiplier, and very few technologies have changed the world. Yes, I can now FaceTime anybody, but there's still relatives in the US I never talk to because no technology in the world is making me miss them more.
Yeah.
The technology is there, but the communication is not until AI arrived. So AI will be something we will be working with to explore what it's going to do to societal structures, companies, etc. But it's also something that's going to be working with us because it's going to impact the way we work and the fact that a lot of what we do can actually be replaced.
And for the foreseeable future, I guess it would be interesting to understand how it's progressing, for example, in futures studies and foresight tasks. At least I'm not aware of any study that can be a qualitative one or even maybe a quantitative one, doesn't really matter, that's comparing the output, the outcomes, maybe even the creativity in such areas, so in future studies and in foresight areas. I've seen some other studies where an AI, and basically just a large language model, to be frank, already outperformed human creativity of what they called an average human, whatever an average human is, to be fair. I mean, nobody of us is an average human, right? But in that study, they had to do it. and cluster those groups. And yeah, it was actually coming up with more distinct and more original ideas than the largest group and than the average group of humans in that study, which is interesting. So I don't know if we can claim creativity to be the thing and the capability of humans alone anymore. But certainly, we'll have to see. I agree.
I would say, I know we treat creativity as a divine feature or some sort of divine gift, which is, outside the Mozarts and etc. Yes, that would if I were a believer, I would say this is divine, because you just can't explain where this is coming from. But for the rest of it, it's a very nice evolutionary skill to say, how should I use this rock to break a nut? That's creativity. That's basically connecting things in the brain that are not usually connected and saying, how could I do this differently? But I live very close to the water, which is fantastic, but I've seen seagulls drop shells from high altitude on the sidewalk, making sure they break. So that's pretty creative, right? So it's not unique to us in that sense. So I would say creativity is a very, very nice skill for doing things in ways they haven't been done before, but based on pre-existing knowledge, except for these glitches in nature where you get Mozart, Einstein, etc. But the rest of it is just a way of connecting existing knowledge and experience in new ways, and animals do it.
Animals do it, and to be frank, if we talk about math and physics and all this stuff, we didn't invent that; we just discovered it. That's the thing. This is going to lead us into a completely different route. And I want to make sure we're maybe not going down this path in this episode. And we are close to the end of this episode, but we actually have a new tradition on this podcast, and which is that the previous guest leaves a question for the next guest without knowing who my next guest is and what we're going to talk about. And the previous guest left the following question for you. The question is, what was your career aspiration as a child and why?
Yeah. The microphone was still working. I'm just thinking. I think when I was a child, I was very much into engineering stuff, actually. Mm-hmm. So it was never a conscious thing. But I think the moment I became conscious, I wanted to do something completely different. I was born in the Soviet Union, and I was born in a time where commercial flight was not normal. So people didn't fly much, which means when someone from your family would fly, you would put on nice clothes and the entire family would go to the airport to see you off. And it would be tears and then when they arrived, everybody went to meet you and there would be tears again. So as crazy as it sounds, well, you did ask me, I always wanted to work in an airport because of all the emotion.
Sure.
And it didn't really matter doing what, but then adding the engineering bit to it, I think I've always wanted to do something with engineering and airports.
That's fair. And at least you had some career aspiration as a child, to be fair. Interesting. Okay. And if you look back on your professional career so far, with all the sums that you've experienced, not necessarily only and only in quotation marks, within the Institute, what would you say was your greatest innovation rockstar moment, your rockstar moment so far?
So my biggest rockstar moment, to stay in with the actual word rockstar, I think I played an amazing concert, if you will, with a microphone that wasn't on. What I mean by that is that in my former life with Risk, we did a big study on large vessels. So right now, the largest vessels, container vessels, they're almost 400 meters long, right? So this is half a kilometer of ship. It's amazing machines. And we mapped out a scenario of what would happen if one of our vessels got stuck in the Suez Canal and blocked it. Mm-hmm. And this was before I learned about Foresight, really. So we did the discipline of saying, we went progressively through a logic of this could happen and this could happen. So basically the Swiss cheese diagram. And then we ended up saying one of our vessels could be blocking one of the major pathways of global trade. And then I came down with my playlist to my colleagues working with shipping, basically the container liner. And we were if not laughed out of the room, but almost. Because they basically asked me, when have you ever been on a ship? You know nothing about it, blah, blah, blah. You know, so this was like, I have this playlist and it's amazing. But the mic wasn't on because they went for the guy, the girl, the messenger, saying, oh, you're corporate, you're young, you've never been on a ship. This can't happen. A couple of years later, I turn on the news. Luckily, it's not a Maersk vessel, somebody else. There is a vessel blocking the Suez Canal. So for me, I may have been one of the few people who actually had my arms a little bit in the air, just unfairly. So my rock star moment was a silent moment where we'd done everything right. We've thought out the box. We did the risk perspective. We could explain the entire journey of plausible events. But the notion and the message was ignored because of who delivered it and how little it fit with other people's reality. And maybe that's a nice way to tie in the knot back to what we started with, saying you have to be able to say what if. You really have to, because if you can't deny every plausible step in the journey, then you're forced to look at the outcome, no matter how unpleasant it must feel. Because if you're not, you're failing on your job. And sometimes a gut feeling in a management room is just a stomach flu.
Yeah, it certainly is. So that's a great rockstar moment. I'm hesitant to call it an "I told you so" moment, but luckily it didn't play out for Maersk, but another company. But yeah, congratulations. Probably a very defining moment in the career. Also, from a psychology perspective, and that's it for this episode. Dasha, thanks so much for being my guest. It was a pleasure and a very interesting conversation. Thanks for investing the time.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure.
And to everybody listening or watching, if you enjoyed this show, simply leave us a comment or drop us an email at info@innovationrockstars.show. Now that's it. Thanks for listening. Take care, everybody, and bye-bye.
This was innovation rockstar Dasha Krivonos of the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies on the future role of AI in foresight and innovation, as well as some personal key learnings from her leadership role at the Institute for Future Studies. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@innovationrockstars.show with your feedback, comments, or questions. And if you're hungry for more inspiring innovation stories, be sure to check out our website at www.innovationrockstars.show or browse through our Innovation Rockstars channel on all major podcast platforms.